So,
Yes.
okay, good. So we're ready. So thanks, Sean, for kicking off the first part of the meeting. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Ali. I'm the chairman on the programs committee, and I'd like to thank everybody tonight for joining tonight's lecture on the Nkosi Smart Cities Initiative. We're happy to have Matthew House with us tonight. And before I introduce him, just a couple of logistics things. Obviously, we're fully remote. You can feel free to type your questions into the chat window during the presentation, and I'll leave it to the speaker to decide if they want to answer questions during the talk. Otherwise, we'll have time for questions at the end of the talk. Matthew is a SSI principal and MBSE technical specialist, a former PTC fellow, a co-chair of the OMG UAF group, a member of the OMG SysML specification team, a co-chair of the OMG reusable asset specification RAS team, and a thought leader on the use of MBSE. He's been developing multinational complex systems for over 45 years as a systems and software engineer. He's authored over 100 technical papers on topics from architectural modeling to project management to systems engineering to systems of systems, UML, SysML, DODAF,
Stuff.
MODAF, and stuff. He's also a proud recipient of the Nkosi MBSE Propeller Hat Award. So thank you, Matthew, for joining us tonight, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yep, it is my proudest accomplishment. I am a beanie head. All right, share screen. Okay. Okay, there we go. Oh, wow. It even stuck the banner on the right. Normally the banner takes up about an inch at the top of your screen. Okay, this will be about a combination of topics, including, of course, the smart cities. It's looking specifically at homelessness, but it's also looking at, in general, what are we trying to accomplish with the smart cities? This presentation was given at the UAF Summit. It was also an Nkosi paper, which we presented in Europe, who were looking at more of these sorts of areas. So it was an interesting one. What I'll do is I'll give you a brief introduction on UAF just so that people know what the heck it is. And we can carry on. Is there, before I do too much on that, is there a possibility to raise hands or anything?
Yes, is that the way you want the questions to come in?
No, I was going to ask who here knows what UAF is. I know Sean is one of the knows a lot about UAF. Just is there a way to raise your hand? I'm looking at all this stuff here. And I don't see raise your hand as an option. All right, that's okay. I'll give you a brief introduction, and if as we're going through it, people say, "What the hell is this guy talking about?" Then I'll just simply stop and we'll go into more detail. All right, so it's about the Smart Cities Initiative, which is trying to look at how do we actually make smart cities, and it's taking obviously a systems engineering approach. And it's looking at, okay, how do we make smart cities, but not in the way that generally people think of them, which is everybody wants to do smart cities by let's introduce a bunch of technology and that'll make it smart. And the Nkosi Smart Cities Initiative has a different point of view on this. So we'll have a look at that. Okay, a second here. Getting chat out as well. There we go. Okay, I'm good to go now. So what is UAF? It's a standard, and this is one definition we came up with to develop architectural descriptions for commercial industries, federal governments, and military. Now, it's derived from DODAF, which is obviously a military architecture framework. NAF being the same, that's the NATO one. But we've evolved it since then to also look at enterprises in general. The UAF task force has 58 distinct use cases that we've looked at for how can you use UAF, and it looks at systems, missions, enterprise, systems of systems engineering, space missions, a whole host of different ones. I've got a set of slides on that if anyone's interested in that as well. It's developed by the OMG, and the heads, that is to say, the chairs of the group, are Dassault, Lockheed Martin, and Systems Strategy. And if you weren't aware, the OMG are the ones who developed SysML as well. It is an ISO standard, and the current version can be found there. And we're also trying to make it more and more ISO 4210 compatible and also compliant. Okay, this is the grid. If you're used to seeing DODAF in the past, then you would see all this, strategic views, etc. NATO came up with the concept of a grid. Well, although in fact it was Zachman who came up with it first, i.e., he had the different levels of the architecture and the different areas he was looking at in terms of enterprise architecture. And he was, in fact, one of the very first people to come up with this. So, what we looked at, and this is the very latest version 1.2, we're looking at it in terms of horizontal, strategic, operational services, and we'll get into that in a minute. But these are always a part of things. What we've added was saying, can we actually categorize the vertical elements of this? One of the very newest ones that we've come up with is the concept of the motivation. And we'll look at some of the motivational elements, i.e., what are the drivers, strategies, and so on and so forth. Requirements and security controls. In other words, it's the why are you doing things? Taxonomy is for defining the different concepts for structure. Structure is how it all fits together. Connectivity is the different interactions that are a part of it. Processes, obviously functionality, state-based behavior, sequences. Information is something which is vertical again throughout, where you can define strategic information or knowledge. Operational at the solution independent level, and then of course the resources linking these to specific systems. And then there's a whole set of parameters. If you think of SysML, this would be the parametric view of the world, but it's also all the different metrics, measurements, environmental aspects, and so on. Constraints are a concept in SysML, although they don't get their own view. It's just a set of concepts that you can associate with this. In terms of roadmap, as everyone knows, SysML v2 is adding a timing construct, but of course, it's been in UAF all along here. So it looks at availability planning, spanning, the different phasing of the different capabilities over times, roadmaps, and so on. And then finally, it has built in traceability in the model itself. That is to say, across the views, in the same way that you can do allocate functionality to structure in SysML, you can also do this. But it also has vertical traceability as well between virtually any uh, horizontal view, i.e., strategic to operational or to service, etc., and back up again. So it allows you to see how your system is going to evolve over time. Now, I mentioned I would talk about the different rows. So at the very top, you have strategic, which is looking at why are we doing anything? What's the business case for doing this? Operational is your system of systems views, but specifically, it's the solution independent view, which is different than how it originally was defined in DODAF 1 DoorDash 2 changed it to be rather than you had nodes, they said, we want performers. Why performers? Because no one knows what they are, so they won't try to make it a military base. And that literally was the thinking behind it. So it's trying to say, what are we trying to do without how? In other words, the logical architecture for that's called for in things like the systems engineering handbook and so on. Services is your service oriented view of the world. So you can, rather than define systems, you can specify what are the services you're trying to achieve. And then in the personnel and resources, demonstrate how these are met. One of the views that was not in DODEF is a security view. So you can use this for cybersecurity analysis, but you can also use it for other things such as safety and defining any sort of risk that you have in your system and demonstrate how that's going to be mitigated. Another view, which is also not in DODEF, is the personnel view. This is its own set of views, so this allows you to do human factors amongst other things. Projects are for the time-based aspects, and then of course standards compliance. And then vertically you have data, as I mentioned before, and then the different roadmaps and of course traceability. Any questions so far? Everybody up to speed with all that? Okay. I've written a lot of papers on UAF. In fact, I think I'm the leading author on UAF papers. I get an idea and I just build a model and start writing about it. In 2021, I live in Texas, as Sean mentioned. We had our grid failure. And so I looked at, okay, why did the grid failure fail? My background was for 20 years, I actually did energy management systems, worked for a power company, and then worked for companies that built the control systems. So it's something I knew a little bit about, and it looked at, well, why did it happen? And it's because no one was motivated to not have it happen. Other things for the last Cozy conference, for example, we looked at how do you define a supply chain and then how to use some of these different aspects to secure this. And the previous paper, this was written by me and Lars Olaf Gillström, who's a Swede. And he sent me this picture of a frozen Swedish windmill, kind of sorted everything out. And then, of course, Don Quixote on the right here. Wrote a paper on supply chains with two of my colleagues, one who is a cyber and security expert, the other who is a supply chain expert. So that one was fun. And the one that I've been working a lot on lately is, of course, the mission engineering with UAF, which looks at the Battle of Hoth as an example for mission engineering. And it's being used as a proof of concepts for the changes that we're adding to UAF to support mission engineering, the mission engineering guide coming out of the DoD, and a whole host of other things. The advantage being it's not classified, so you can show it to anyone. All right, but back to smart cities after that brief introduction. Jennifer Russell actually runs smart cities. Her and a Dutch fellow whose name escapes me at the second, but it'll come by the end of the time. And her job, she works for a company that does infrastructure as well as a host of other things. One of the things she does a lot with is water treatment plants. And they're looking at how do you have smart cities? Now, it's an initiative that's going on in Cozy for a while. And what we did is we actually built a model for it, but more on that in a minute. Okay, if you've looked at smart cities at all, you realize they're a moving target. And the lack of success has meant that when people talk about smart cities, they say, oh, a money hole. We know smart cities. Yeah, that's where all our money goes into and nothing ever comes out again. Well, in fact, this is one of the things, looking at the definition that we'll show you in a second that we're trying to change with the Cozy Smart Cities initiative. So rather than doing the solutioneering, which everybody goes towards, we need this technology. We say, what's the problem? And we even go back further, what's the need? And we go back further and say, why do you want to change? What are your overall goals, dreams, visions? What does a smart city means and what makes it smart? So there's a lot of things involved in this. So Incozy is actually teaming up with a group which is from Mongolia, which seems like an odd place for this to come from. But they've done an excellent job in that they're looking not so much at the whole technology side of things, but they're looking at the human aspects of this, which is, again, which is where all this comes from. If you look at the Nkosi working groups, you can see effectively a lot of these have a lot to do with smart cities, if not directly, then indirectly. Things like health care, social systems, transportation systems, and so on and so forth. And that's part of why Nkosi is well set to be looking at these different aspects. We're working with the IEEE IEC. We're talking to a few municipalities, Boulder, Colorado, and there's one I'll show you a little later, which looks at San Diego. We got a meeting with the San Diego city manager who's looking at this, and we're having a great time with that. And I believe it's this month or next month. They're actually going to be in Barcelona at the Smart Cities Conference. So we're trying to support the communities with the different concepts, application technologies, services, etc., and try to make use of the combined astonishing brain power of the Nkosi membership to try to build up a set of concepts here and see, can we take a systems engineering approach to smart cities? So, as we've said at the beginning, success in a smart city. This was written by David Graham, Chief Innovator Officer for Carlsbad, where they originally said, we're going to create this smart city. It didn't go well, and then they thought, okay, let's step back. And says it has all to do with people. We need to get the public involved in figuring out what does the public want in terms of a smart city. Now, I live north of Austin in a small town called Round Rock, and I have rolling fields to the north of me. Prior to this, I lived in the UK and mostly had cows for neighbors. And I think at one point I lived in a village with 100 people in the middle of nowhere. And for me, that was idyllic. Of course, for somebody else, that is their idea of hell. And instead, they would prefer to be an urban dweller living in an apartment on the 30th floor. And that would be my idea of hell. So, smart city is driven by the people who live there. It's not so much what the managers and the rest want it to be, it's the people. So it needs to be driven by what the public actually wants from their city. And its goal needs to be, how do we make life people better for the people? Some of these initiatives, if you see here, the People First Broadway plan, where they're looking at new plazas, shared streets, two-way bike lanes, so on and so forth. Um, the raised walkway is another example of somebody stepping back and saying, how do we actually make more livable spaces for people? Um, the other thing is we looked at is we wanted a smart city. This is a paper written by Khalil Keros. And he said, there's no combination, there's no definition. So this is the one we came up with. So we say a smart city is capable of identifying its problems, mitigating root causes by generating and processing engineered quality data in a continuous and inclusive manner, which isn't a bad definition of a smart city or even a smart system. So if you think of systems, for instance, that are capable of doing conditions-based maintenance or doing self-healing, etc., or coming up and doing self-diagnostic, it's going to have lots of these different attributes. So if you expand this out to a city, which is, of course, a large system of systems, and in fact, an enterprise of enterprises, as it were, you're getting pretty close. I mentioned the human aspects, and there's an economist who's Chilean, and his name was Arthur Manfred Max Neef. Lived from 1932 to 2019. And he looked at the human fundamental needs. Now, you've probably seen, the level of human needs, i.e., you need food, water, oxygen, shelter, and a host of other things. He looked at these far more in terms of the human fundamental needs to actually have not just a life where you're surviving, but actually where you're thriving. So yes, you have subsistence, but he also and protection. But he also looked at things like affection, understanding, participation, the ability to think freely, creation, identity and self-expression, freedom of choice, and how they're all work together to build up a happy and effective human. So, with the Nkosi view of the world, they said people are at the center of the most complex challenges facing these. Again, some of the issues that they looked at were economic development, unhoused residents, which is, of course, the point of view for this particular model. We're looking at others as well, but we're trying to identify um, in these documents, looking at the Smart City Initiative, a centered set of metrics. There was a reference architecture for smart cities that was created by an ISO group, which has fallen out of favor. I think it was an awful lot of data leading nowhere. But we're trying to reframe that and come up with different ones. All right. So social enterprises. We're going to look at the Nkosi Smart Cities Initiative. So um, I came up with this model, and I'm hoping to hand it off where we have it located on the Nkosi Tools database. So it's up there, and we're hoping that someone will adopt it and further develop it. I occasionally go in and add different things to it. But the majority of this I actually did over a few days, and then we updated it later, and more on this later. So I came up with this problem space, trying to look at it in terms of the effect that unhoused people have on the city and the effect that the city has on them as well. In other words, it's a mutual thing. And the intention being that we're not going to try to either outlaw unhoused people or homelessness, or arrest them, or just simply make them go away. We're going to try to figure out how do we actually make them useful members of society, as it were, and try to make sure that we have less of them dying, as you can see here from the problem statement of alcohol poisoning, overdose, exposure, violence, etc. Also to get people the mental health treatment that they need, counseling, education, and so on. So that's the goal here. And so I started by building the model and thought, okay, let's start looking at technology for this, and stopped myself and said, well, hang on a minute. I'm doing exactly what you're not supposed to do. And in fact, I created a model that looks at two areas of UAF, one being the personnel views, i.e., what are the different organizations, people, competencies, skills, abilities, and so on, and the strategic views to define what are our different problems and how do we want to solve these and how is this going to be affected over time. So the starting point that you can do with UAF, again, those of you who are familiar with DODAF know this is the OV1 diagram, where you're saying, okay, let's try to understand the problem. And as you can see, we have our unhoused person at the center here. And these are the different relationships that exist. So you can say, for instance, the unhoused person desires permanent housing. A housing organization is going to provide this. The city government manages this. The educational organization can educate the unhoused person. The charity organization assists. Law enforcement monitors, etc. But it's trying to put the unhoused person at the center and see what are the different relationships, both positive and negative, because again, you have to look at these things in a realistic way. We also looked at what are the different city goals. Now, a lot of these goals I actually got off the city of Austin website, which is a very progressive city. And so these are some of the things that they looked at. For instance, what's your resident experience providing services in a consistent and efficient manner? Environmental leadership, again, and looking at other things, providing shelter. Audubon's going to work with state and federal agencies. So by defining these goals that we have here, we can say, okay, we can then look at what's our strategy later on for achieving these and how do we do these over time. Um, Specifically to the homeless or the unhoused people, we're looking at we need a safe environment, provide shelter for them, have addiction treatment and permanent housing, but also make sure that we do this at a rate that we're not going to go bankrupt. So we have to figure out how do we actually make this initiative something which is financially viable. Looking at it in terms of the enterprise, you can actually break this up into different phases. And generally, that's when you're doing these studies or trying to figure out how do I actually roll this out. You don't say, okay, I'm going to take all of my systems and we'll go out and do this. No, your first step is, well, let's collect these unhoused statistics. Who are the people? What are their attributes? What are their problems? How did they end up here? And you'll see some other aspects that we modeled about this. The next phase, we're going to increase our shelter capacity. And then in the third phase, we're going to start looking at providing permanent housing. So our intention is along these lines. We're also going to have different uh, initiatives for actually improving people's lives. Other aspects that we have here are things like enduring tasks, which is things that we do to keep the doors open, i.e., refuse collection, tax collection, etc. But these different phases are actually going to be, as I said, rolled out over time. Now, we're looking at the people, as I mentioned. And so one of the things is looking at, well, what are the characteristics of both the people, i.e., their health, are they in stable health? Do they have cancer? Are they mentally ill? In terms of work, one of the things which is not very well known is that there's an awful lot of unhoused people that actually have full-time jobs. They just can't afford to live where they work. So often they'll sleep in their cars or other places, temporary housing. Also the different living environments that they have and the different geographic areas. And so I did a lot of research. I looked at various articles, studies, including there's a famous United Nations one. There's a charity in the UK that looks at unhoused people and how to help them, and quite a few here in the US, and came up with what I thought was the definition. As you see at the top, we have the unhoused person. And there's some built-in attributes here of terms of what's the primary cause of why they're homeless. Um, how long have they been homeless? What's the secondary cause? Where do they currently reside? age, criminal history. And then on the right, we've got some of the different causes, such as mental health, unemployment, PTSD, etc. On the left, what their current housing is. And then there were four different types that were spelled out in the different literature. So we had chronically unhoused people, that is to say, people who are basically unhoused, have been for a long time, and are likely to be for a much longer time. Episodic unhoused, people who are in and out of being unhoused. And here's the actual person here. She lives in the 4th Street Bridge. She's homeless, lives in a homeless encampment, and her health is stable. She's 33. She doesn't have a criminal history. The primary cause of her homelessness is domestic violence, and the secondary cause is PTSD, and has been homeless for 50 days, and so on and so forth. So, by modeling the types of people and looking at their different attributes, it helps you get a better understanding of them. We then stepped back and said, well, what capabilities does the city currently have? That is to say, the services that are involved in this. And we've modeled these as capabilities. And we're saying, well, a lot of these have to do, or at least are involved around uh, housing. So we have housing provision, law enforcement, health services, shelter provision, adult education, emergency care, and so on and so forth. The city has many more uh, capabilities, but this is just one set of them. We then said, okay, for these different capabilities, what are the different organizations that are actually providing this capability? Think of a capability, if you're not familiar with them, as the ability to achieve a desired effect. So you have to say, what am I trying to achieve? And then you sort of encapsulate that with the capability, and allows you to define, rather than I need this particular system, technology, organizations. It's what am I trying to achieve? And then therefore, what are all the multiple ways in which you can achieve these? And if you look at the different capabilities that we're showing here, most of these have at least two means by which you can provide this. Housing is federal housing and city housing. Also, you'll have charities as well. Mostly there for shelter, health services in terms of clinics and hospital. And again, this is only a subset of these. And we're trying to define what are our organizations, all the people, etc. So we looked a little bit more in detail. And again, this can evolve over time. But what are the different types of healthcare organizations? What are the different posts, i.e., jobs? The categories of people that actually work in these different places and so on. And then also looked at other aspects, such as types of government organizations. And obviously, they'll have some cross things, i.e., you may have a government housing, a government. So some of these are going to be both categories of different organizations, as well as things like voluntary organization. You may have voluntary healthcare, for instance. But looking at all these different organizations that you see here, in terms of Alcoholics Anonymous, Halfway Home, Houses, etc. Again, sticking with the different people that we have here, we said, okay, what are all the positive events and the negative events that can occur in the life of an unhoused person? And how does this involve things either going down a deadly spiral, as it were, or you have a virtuous cycle where things actually, snowball and things get better and better. So on the negative side, job loss, court hearing, being arrested, violence victim, becoming an addict or substance abuse, illness, etc. And then on the right there, a lot of these, as you can see, have the word request, i.e., it's the person who is unhoused reaching out and saying, I want to go into a shelter, I want treatment, I need counseling, I need training, and so on and so forth. And so, one of the ways that you can express these concepts is with a state diagram, where you're saying, okay, I'm currently in the state of being housed or unhoused. Now, what are all the events that can occur in one's life? And again, some of these might be combinations that would cause you to go from being housed to unhoused, job loss, financial issues, violence victim, mental health, being thrown out of your house if you're a young person, substance abuse. Of course, the red ones are the negative. You've been arrested, you're unhoused, you're having a judgment, you're incarcerated. And for all these different transitions where the result is a negative outcome, you can look at and say, okay, for job losses, number one, how do we actually identify when this occurs, especially I.e., a factory closes or in the news you hear that there's been layoffs. Can we intercede here and say, okay, who are all the people that are actually at risk of becoming unhoused? Because once that happens, it becomes a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive from the city's point of view. So if you just look at it from a cost effective manner rather than these are human beings, gee, let's help them, it's much better to actually see, can we actually prevent this from happening, rather than once they're actually unhoused to try to actually get them back into housing. Also, you've been arrested. Well, okay, once you're in jail, if we're aware that this is an unhoused person, can we intercede here and say, okay, if they're an addict, can we get them to addiction treatment? If they have mental health, rather than being incarcerated, can we get them here? After this finish, can we get them into a halfway house? Can we get them undergoing training and job counseling temporarily? So you can see what you have here, and it's looking at how do you prevent the negatives and try to encourage the positives. Uh, Looking back at that original diagram where we had all the graphics, I then said, okay, we've defined a set of organizations, and this is not all of them. What are the different interactions in terms of shelter requests from the city or from the housing department, the court system in terms of different judgments, providing shelter, job counseling, and having that request? And I looked at this unhoused person when I actually finished drawing this diagram, and I said, this is pretty overwhelming. Um, what is a way that this thing can actually be made better? And so the solution that came up with was we actually need a service in the government and we need an advocate, i.e., an unhoused case manager for these different people. Now, you're not going to have one for every single unhoused person, but if someone actually says, I would like to actually take advantage of the city's services and do what I can to become housed again. Well, how do we do this? How do we make things better? So, our new capability is unhoused management, and this is the organization that provides it. A few posts, such as industry, charity outreach, a manager for the organization, and then the case manager. Now, some of the things that are built into UAF is you can say, okay, what qualifications do they have in terms of what standards do they conform to? Police background check, driver's license, etc. Um, and what are the different risks that this person or the host is actually could happen. So we have violence and job burnout. So for violence, we're going to look at police assistance. We may also look at mental health provisions and come up with a different one. So it may not just be uh, having a security control of, well, we need the police with them. Are there other alternatives? You don't necessarily just have to have this one. You've got For job burnout, you can have mandatory counseling to make sure that this doesn't happen. One of my sisters did this, and so I talked to her about this. And for this particular job, you can look at and say, okay, what do they have to be able to do? Assess addiction, assess mental health. And again, not a detailed one, but just being aware of this as part of conflict de escalation. And this would be their competency. The competency of department coordination, identifying benefits, identifying housing options, interpersonal skills, screening partitions participants and conducting initial assessments. So, for the people that are working in these different organizations, you can say what competencies they need to do their job. You can also apply these to the unhoused people. If we're going to do employment assistant, what skills do they have? What can they do? Other than just, simply manual labor? Is this someone who actually had a decent technical job, but just is unable to carry on? Can we get them back on that path, etc.? So it's not just the people who are doing it. The other thing was stepping back and saying, okay, we need this, but how do we finance it? What's our strategy for actually making this happen? So we have two goals that we have defined here, addiction treatment and a safe environment. So in terms of addiction treatment, what was the drivers? Well, lots of people were dying. We were getting an increasing number of unhoused people. And there's the opioid epidemic, which is going on. So all of these, the challenge of reducing addiction, were presented by these drivers. The driver being the thing that causes you to actually do something. And then what is the opportunity that we're going to take advantage of that is actually going to provide us the means to achieve this? Well, it's opioid settlement funds. And again, risk comes into this. What's the risk? We're going to misspend the funds. For instance, when the tobacco judgments came around, most of the governments just threw it into their general coffers and didn't use this to improve their medical support. So as a result, you had missed opportunities. Another risk, you've got addiction treatment. Well, drug trafficking. You need to make sure the drug dealers stay away from the detox clinic and all the rest of it. Another thing, again, it may not be drugs itself, it may be alcohol, which is obviously a far more popular thing. And you have the similar thing for a safe environment, i.e., we have lots of unhoused people. This is causing urban flight, a negative public perception, increased crime. Um, we need to reduce the number of unhoused people and reduce crime because, again, these unhoused people are the major victim of crime. So how are we going to do this? Let's see if we can make use of some of these COVID funds, because of course, with all the loss uh, employment, etc., a lot of people did become unhoused. So again, we're going to make use of the COVID funds, and we're going to do this in terms of financing our unhoused management department, and again, tying all these things together. So it's not just here's a system. It's, well, how are you going to do this, and why are you doing this? And you can even go back to who are your stakeholders and what are the different concerns, etc. And it's all about the measurements. Okay, we're going to do a system, but what are our current metrics? Remember, the first phase was collecting the measurements, and then phase two is okay, let's provide this. But all along the way, we're going to look at, i.e., here's our capability, these are the measurements involved in that. Here's an organization, these are the measures by which they're evaluated. And we can create what are called actual outcomes and actual effects for these. Our actual outcome is how many unhoused people have we reduced, reduction in mental health issues in terms of the unhoused management effect over the years from 2022, 2023, 2024. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? what is the cost per unhoused person? Is there a better way to actually provide these services? Again, it's all about the numbers. So we thought, this is great. Went to talk to San Diego, as I mentioned, and they said, you did a really good job, and this stuff is incredibly useful, but it's actually more complex than you think. And you got one of your determinants wrong in terms of unhoused people. So we looked at it and they said, okay, so this is one part of one page of a spreadsheet that I think had about 20 tabs. And for San Diego, this is the name of the different organizations. This is the general category, homelessness prevention in terms of disaffiliation, homelessness prevention in terms of poverty. And it lists the different services that they have, i.e., who are the people, the different customers, as it were, that they have, i.e., everyone, youth, seniors, immigrants, and so on and so forth. We studied all these and we looked at these, and in fact, rather than the unhoused person being categorized by why they're the different types, i.e., are they permanent or temporary? It's in general instead why are they unhoused? And they came up with a whole new set of categories, i.e., aged out foster, immigrants, unemployed, voluntary homeless, people who just literally do not want to live in a house and prefer to live on the streets, which is an actual category. People who are employed, people who have mental health issues, domestic violence, and obviously there'll be some crossover on this. We still have the current housing, still have the cause, but we came up with the unhoused type actually being an attribute rather than a type. So unhoused type is up here, the primary, secondary, and then added a tertiary cause because it's more concept than we thought. Unhoused time, where they reside, their age, criminal history, but also a few others. Dependent children, family support, motivation. Why do they want to become housed? Why do they want to change their lives? What's their motivation that's causing them to do this? And are they employed? And I created an attribute here. Everyone's heard of fuzzy logic. So rather than just yes or no, it's yes, no, unknown, sporadic, and other. So it allows you to actually specify for this. Things are not really necessarily that cut and dry. And then went back and took those different people and actually created a whole new set of these where we have, again, Jose here, no criminal history, but looking at things like residing his vehicle. What's the primary cause? He's employed, but housing is unaffordable. So how do we actually get this person employed? And we looked at this and said, well, what are all the services that we saw in that spreadsheet? Well, they had job search, job training, finding housing, homelessness coordination, case management, homelessness prevention, or the many tasks that they have, and then looked at, okay, can we in fact define searching for a job, upskilling by getting job training, searching for shared accommodation? Maybe, okay, you might not be able to get your own apartment, but can you share one? Housing assistance, training and finance. Why? So you can have better money management. So it's looking at the top here of what's your strategy? Income, improve skills, sharing, housing assistance, money management, financial assistance. And once they've gone through this phase, are they housed? If the answer is no, then you keep going until that person is actually housed. And once they are, yes, they may continue to decide, okay, actually, I do want to do upskilling, etc. And you can say, okay, again, how do we improve people's lives? Another one was a substance abuser. So rather than the generic one, it's what are the actual states of someone who is a substance abuser? And looking at other aspects as a part of this, in terms of housing, etc. We're not showing these, but they're on others. The one state which is not shown, of course, is death, which sadly is quite common. Also arrested and incarcerated. well, what are the services providing here? How do we actually get in here and actually model? So abuse treatment here, but what's going on there? And then again, here's some of the aspects of the other one. These are some of the different services that we've defined. And what we then did was, again, there's several diagrams of this, mapping the different organizations to the different services that they provided, which we've modeled as functions. And then we actually created this nice table here showing all this. You can have a matrix. And by building this up over time, you can look at what's the overlap? What do I have an awful lot of in terms of the services? What organization seems to be the most effective? Who is the different market area for these different people, etc. And also as part of this, okay, we have different use cases in terms of searching for assistant. Here's the person here. And again, looking at the different organizations. So again, expressing what we did previously, i.e. in terms of employed homeless, by saying finding housing, homeless coordination, job search, etc. So in conclusion, the most important thing is, however much you think you understand something, you don't, which is generally the way with all systems engineering projects. So you always have to keep your eyes open and be humble and realize, okay, somebody probably knows more about this than you do. But by understanding the causes, major events, the cycle of being involuntarily unnoticed, we can see, can we intervene and end this cycle? And a host of other things which I've already gone for. Now, I did mention if you would like to help out, please contact us. More, we have multiple spreadsheets. We'd like to add more information to it. So there's Jennifer Russell's email. We're also trying to create reference architecture, solution architecture development, but also looking at things like rural high-speed internet and smart grids. If you do want to join, I think I sent a PDF of a set of slides. I added a couple more, but this is the main one if you'd like to help. Uh, my colleague Lars and I and Jennifer were the ones that did this one. And thank you. This is a great slide that Aurelius, one of my co-chairs on the UAF group, came up with. I quite like this. Anyways, anybody have any questions? I didn't see any in the chat or hands
Yes.
raised.
Um, Thank you. Very interesting. I do have a question. I want to go back
Sure.
almost all the way back to the beginning of the talk where you talked about coming up with a definition of smart cities. And I was thinking no one else had developed a definition, or did you find the other definitions lacking in some way?
We thought, oh, of course, there's multiple definitions. The problem was there was no common definition
Mhm.
that everyone agreed on. So we came up with that one, which, it had a more self-actualizing specification to it, which is this one. It's not, smart cities need technology to improve, or smart cities are ones where the managers know what's going on, or no, we wanted to say overall it's increasingly improving. And the way it does this is that it can identify problems, root causes, and do this by generating and processing engineered quality data. And it's an
Mhm.
ongoing thing.
Okay.
I,
And
I joined the Smart Cities Initiative when a lot of this stuff, including this, was already taken care of, i.e., these were the fundamentals. And this is what caused me to actually, when I started looking at the model, say, well, okay, let's concentrate on the people, because that's the point of view that the whole initiative is taking. And to be honest with you, the reason why there's personnel views in UAF is I fought for them for about 10 years, and eventually we got them in there. Again, my colleague Lars was the one that actually defined a lot of the meta model aspects. I gave him a bunch of detail. He was also involved in some of these human factors views. And the more we use them, the more we realize how useful they are. But also we could use a few more things. We're looking at competency frameworks, for instance, and we realize that we don't have a means by which how you define how competency is created.
Mhm.
What are the different aspects, and how do you match up people types with post types, not just actual people? So we've got a few more things we need to add to it. But again, it's only the more you use this, the more you see how it can be used.
Okay. Thanks. That makes sense.
Yeah, but I agree with you. You would have thought that somebody would have come up with a similar definition of a smart city. But again, we're all technology focused. It's just we do solutioneering, don't we, sometimes in spite of ourselves. And you need somebody to slap you across the face and say, stop that. That's for electrical engineers or one of those types of people. Systems engineers don't do that. Right, guys?
Right. Nonviolence
There you go. It's
until it's
all about
required, then we do it.
there you go. Especially against electrical engineers. Those guys are just annoying anyway.
They're so 2D.
Yes, there you go.
Any
No,
other any other
I was
questions?
one of those for many years, so never mind.
John, you got a question?
Yeah, actually, I was wondering, I like the idea of an unhoused case manager, that kind of, acts as a clearinghouse, I guess, for all the various services and to bring them together. It kind of reminds me of like sometimes for health plans, they'll have like a health manager who deals with the
Yeah.
HMO for you and deals with, all the nonsense of all the records and the doctor's offices and appointments and everything else. I'm curious, uh, when you first presented the smart cities architecture, the initial version to San Diego. Did they have any sort of response to the idea of an unhoused case manager? And did they think it was a good idea? And it was just more the categories that you had for other things needed to be tweaked, or how did they receive that?
No, that they were actually quite keen on, and that was something they had planned. And when I
Oh,
showed
okay, good.
this to Jennifer, she said, "Huh, that is quite interesting," because she lives in Kansas City, and she said they just recently actually created a department specifically along those lines to
Mm,
actually do that case management. So
wow.
I felt, okay, I guessed right. And
Yeah,
again, as you guys know, the more you do this for a living, you get better at guessing. Um,
yeah,
and so, yeah, I felt good about that, that I wasn't 100 miles off.
yeah.
But yeah,
Very good.
it is something San Diego is actively implementing because they realize that it's the only way to do this. If someone
Yeah,
isn't actually doesn't actually own the problem never gets solved.
right, right. Yeah, and I imagine for a lot of, the unhoused too, it's just, even if they want to try to find a job and want to get out of the situation they're in and all that stuff, it's just, can be overwhelming, right? Like I mean, I think of various problems that I procrastinate on, in my life and where I'm like, I just don't feel motivated to deal with that right now. It's like my doctor told me recently, he's like, if you lost some weight, that would help a lot. And I'm like, yes, I know that. I understand that that's the solution. I will motivate myself to deal with that at some point. But now when you have like 50 different things all hitting you and you're not, blessed to be living in a nice suburban townhouse like me or whatever, and have the ability to kind of kick back and decide what problem you're gonna tackle today kind of thing. I imagine it's utterly overwhelming for an unhoused person.
Yeah, and we've all had experience with relatives or family or friends or whoever who have been in these situations. And,
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing as
Yeah.
everybody knows is they'll when they're ready and they ask
Mm-hmm.
for help, then you can help them. Prior to
Right.
that, there's not a lot you can do other than make sure that they stay alive.
Right.
So, anyways, Clinton, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I figured out how to raise my hand.
I am very impressed.
Yeah, the it's well, I guess everybody has a different interface possibly, but mine has 3 little dots with a more, and there is
Oh,
buried a reactions. And then after you
Mm,
click reactions, it brings up the little hand thing. But I
okay,
do
that is
actually have a
cool.
question though, too, along
Sure.
with raising my hand. Um, so when you presented the systems engineering architectural views model to some of these city planners, did was it able to highlight like any particular gaps in their current approaches? Like did it shine a spotlight on some things? Like, for instance, you were saying the case managers, it
Yeah.
sounded like they didn't even have that, although they may have been thinking about it, you know.
The thing they liked the best, which surprised me, but apparently this fellow's background, he was a mechanical engineer for a while until he got into sociology. And so the concept of a state machine to him was actually spoke to him in a way that all the other stuff did not. In other words, the concept that you're in this state and there are various ways out of it. And again, the concept of our job in terms of helping people is to figure out how do you actually, the concept of nudging?
Nudging.
Yeah, and it's a psychological thing. So rather than coming up to saying to someone, okay, we'll take Sean's example. Okay, we're going to move into your house, and I'm going to control all the food that you eat, and make this your life a living hell until you lose weight.
I see. I see.
Or with
Yeah,
nudging,
thumbs up.
it's
Do that.
actually, there you go. Okay, Mike's in favor. With nudging, what you try to do is you say, okay, what are the small incentives that I can provide this person such that they build up to the point that the person actually by themselves makes this decision? And it can be both positive and negative. In other words, by small disincentives and by small incentives to try to actually funnel people in a certain way, in a way that it's not coercive or they feel like they're being forced to do this. But yeah, and there's a lot of self-help about this, and a lot of HR departments are seeing, okay, can we actually make this a part of how we do business so that way we have happier employees? I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a brother-in-law who actually works doing industrial psychology, and he's written a couple of books on this, and it's just fascinating stuff that looks at why people do what they do and how do you have happier employees, because that's his whole business.
Mhm.
So learned a lot from him on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the assumptions I think in beginning this was is that the people are asking for help, but there's probably a lot of homeless who aren't asking for help or
Right.
can't ask for help for whatever, the things going on with them. It might be interesting to see if there's potential aspects that can be considered for helping those types of people too.
Oh yeah, no, it's number one, making people aware that there
Good.
are help is available, what these pathways are, and as I said, making it as frictionless as possible
Right.
is another term that they mention. But the whole reason why a lot of it is people asking for help is because unless it's voluntary, it's just not going to happen. Um,
Yeah.
it's just, and I'm an ornery person. If someone tries to force me to do just about anything, I'm looking around and going, let's see, how do I avoid doing this thing that is really going to make my life better, that that person is trying to make me to do?
Right.
So, uh, yeah,
Nudge averse.
there you go. And it's
Yeah,
generally my
that's
wife, and it's going, stupid wife. As I say to her often, I hate it when you're right. And the thing I hate most is you're almost always right. We all say this, don't we?
When you talk to San Diego again, or did you get any data on the types, on the different types of homelessness? Did anybody say, look, out of these, I don't know, roughly 7 or 8 types,
Yep.
you should focus on these 5 because the other 4, there just aren't that many people, or
They did.
they did.
They're looking at 4 specific types. Those are the ones that I had the most highlighted.
Okay.
We've got 2 people that work for SSI who volunteered to help with this, mostly because they live in San Diego.
Okay.
They're also systems engineers. They're both ex-Navy, so they know of people who were in that situation, or in fact, some who still are, and who've been struggling with some of these different issues here. And probably another category would be a veteran, to be honest, because again, they're going to have their own motivations and reasons as to why they're there. And again, their own unique paths for how they get out. And as I said, that was one of the more interesting parts of it in terms of realizing there's a lot more to it than you think. So it's that being open, talking to these subject matter experts, building it up, and we're currently trying to add more to this database because the intention is um, a a lot of the papers are not, this is how UAF solves your problem. No, it's this is how UAF identifies your problem. And then you're going to use different tools to actually solve the problem. And it's what systems engineering is all about. We don't do useful things like, build CAD models or show people how to do electrical systems, etc. No, 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 no. We show them what they need to do, what the requirements are for these things. And that's what these models are meant to be, to very clearly state, okay, this is what you think the problem is. It's actually something else. And by the way, if you take this approach, this is the cost benefit analysis and etc. All the rest of it. And let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll iterate back around on it again. Because this is one situation where you get pretty fast feedback, things that do and don't. But yeah, and we're like I said, it's mostly trying to get this thing up and running.
And then the last question I've got is that I've read that one of, or maybe the most important thing you can do for someone who's homeless is first step is to get them a home, a permanent address, because then providing the other services become easy. Was there any view that there's sort of these overriding injections that you could, and I guess my question is, if there is something like that, how would you model that, or have you thought about how to model that in your setup?
Yeah, there's a few ways. I'd have to think about that. That's a very good question, actually. So well done on that. But it's would probably be along the lines of, as you saw, we had the person in a house, and providing not permanent addresses necessarily initially, but a mailing address where someone could receive mail and could actually put as what their address was. One of the biggest things, as you know, with government benefits, if you don't have an address, you can't get government benefits.
Right.
And, if you get stopped by the police and they say, "Do you live here?" you get a ticket if the address on your license is not that place. So it's, can you actually set things up such that people have a mailing, and better yet, an address which is actually a correspondence address to help them. And then if you can get, as you said, the path is normally temporary shelter and then permanent shelter. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because there are people who are just determined to not be housed.
Right.
And for those people, you may have to say, you know what? It might be a better idea if you find another city to live in, if your intention is just simply to cause problems and be a nuisance, as it were. We're offering you all these things, you don't want them. Okay, we might not be the city for you. Again, I don't do this for a living, and that's probably one of the reason I don't, because I might be too quick to do that, and that's why you need people who do this for a living, because it's got a whole set of skills that I don't. When I deal with my grandchildren, for instance, my favorite reply is, "I don't care. Go and do this. I don't want to. I don't care. Eat this. I don't like it. I don't care." you know, obviously that's not the point of view you can take when you're trying to help people. So it's, as I said, it is a skill set, but I fully emphasize, and you know, I've had things happen in my life where, boy, I could have gone down that route, so I fully understand this. It's a hard thing, and the main thing is I'm not going to judge anybody. Just if you make bad decisions, figure out how do I turn them around, and that's the main thing.
Okay. Well, this has
But
been awesome, Matthew. Thank you. You know,
oh, not a problem.
yeah, or certainly opened my eyes. I hadn't thought about that. I had certainly opened my eyes about how modeling can be used as some, look at something that's fairly complicated, and develop some insights, right? Useful even to the people who are working with it all the time, right? So I think this is really, really interesting stuff. So definitely something I'm
And
going to follow up on.
and that's what we're trying to do in general with UAF, is to say, can you actually use this for something other than, you know, modeling
Hmm.
battlefields and
Hmm.
such? What can it be used for? And we've used it for housing, banking. You know, the number of applications we've got where it's been
Hmm.
used has been amazing. One of the things, for instance, I've been doing lately is mission engineering, of course, military, um, in its areas, and I'm reviewing a PhD of a student who's doing this on urban transportation systems, trying to look at electrical based helicopters. Um,
Hmm.
and she said, I sent her the mission engineering and stuff, and she said, could you use this for business? And I said, yes, but I'm not sure specifically. But two areas which it would be incredibly useful for is, you know, how do you do disaster relief? I.e., you've got all the infrastructure. What are the procedures that you go through in order to provide this disaster relief, both in terms of solution independent, then solution specific, but also context specific, because obviously for fire, pandemic, flood, etc., it's going to be different. And so, can you define what the mission is, the order in which you do things, what the planning procedures you go through? And I think it's one of the things that I would like to do, so that, again, you know, you probably, those who've, you've heard the term, it's in the Bible. It talks about turning your swords, your spears into plowshares, and
Hmm.
your swords into pruning hooks, and all the rest of it. I.e., can we take something um, and say we can actually use this to make the world a better place, as well as, you know, defend our country, which I'm all big on. But everything is multi-purpose. You can
Hmm.
use anything
Excellent
for
point.
good or bad, and uh,
Yeah.
let's use it for multiple types of good, defending our country, and also how do we actually help people.
Can't think of a better way to end a lecture. Excellent point. Thank you.
Okay. All
All
right.
right.
Well,
Good night,
thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Kaz, do you have the recording? Who's recording? Don't know.
Well, that's a